Welcome to David's Ships. In this video I continue with the construction of the 1 in 350 scale Schwerer Gustav kit. To watch other videos in this build series, follow the link to the playlist in the cards above. In today's video I'll be applying the panel line. This is a very messy process and it may look like I'm ruining the model, but the reality is it's actually a very safe process and that the majority of this panel line will be easy to remove. In fact, I'd say that by the end of this process, many viewers will believe that I've removed too much of the panel line. My preference when it comes to panel line and weathering is to have a very clean look. I like my models to represent the vehicle, the ship, the gun, whatever it is, as it was when it was still new and in good condition. So for me, panel line is really about bringing out the details in a subtle way to make the model look less fake. Without panel line, everything is far too homogeneous and it'll look a bit odd. When you put some panel line on it, even if you remove the majority of it, what is left does create a more textured effect and bring some life to the overall look of the model. When it comes to applying the panel line, I am not careful at all. My goal is to apply it to as many of the surfaces as possible to get it to bring out as much of the detail as possible. I have no concern about any excess. It is very important before applying panel line to a model to cover it in an acrylic gloss varnish. The gloss varnish will protect the underlying paint and make the panel line easily flow over the surface. The gloss coat also makes it very easy to remove excess. If you have used any enamel paints for your color coat, then an acrylic varnish is especially important because panel line is enamel based and its solvent would also dissolve the color coat. So if you apply an enamel based panel line onto an enamel based color coat without an acrylic varnish between them, when you remove the panel line, you'll also remove the color coat, and that will ruin your model. I generally work with acrylic paints for my color coat and then an acrylic varnish, so that when I do apply panel line, it's going on top of acrylic only paints and I can be sure that the underlying paintwork will not be damaged when I remove the panel line. And now for a time lapse of me applying black panel line to the model. After letting the panel liner dry for around 30 minutes, it can be removed. To remove it, I'm using Mr. Weathering Color Solvent 110. To remove the panel line, I dip an earbud in the solvent and then dry off as much of it as I can. I then take the very lightly wetted earbud and gently drag it along the surface to remove the excess panel line. In the harder to reach places, or in places where I want to remove a bit more panel line, I use a brush, also wetted with the turpentine and dried off as much as possible. In this process, you'll find that it is very easy to remove the panel line, and if anything, you'll find yourself removing too much of it. In the areas that are difficult to reach with the earbud or paintbrush, I take a paintbrush and load it up with a lot of solvent and then drench the area. That lifts up a lot of the panel line and allows it to flow more naturally into the gaps. Then the excess can be sucked out with a piece of cloth or an earbud from the side. I use that as the method for thinning out the panel line in the areas that I'm not able to adequately reach. Now for another time lapse, this time of me removing the majority of the panel line from the model. Once I have the panel line in a state that I'm happy with, not too much or too little, it then needs to be sealed in. To seal it in, I spray the entire kit in Tamiya XF86 flat clear. After spraying the model with the matte varnish, you'll no longer be able to remove any panel line, so before moving on to this step, make sure that you have adequately cleaned up the model. You'll notice that as you spray on the matte coat, the model will appear to get lighter. This is just the effect that a gloss coat has. A gloss coat makes the model look darker, and then the matte coat will lighten it up again. After spraying on a couple of coats of the matte varnish, and then giving the model about an hour to dry, final assembly can begin. And by final assembly, I mean placing the gun onto its carriers. I've decided that I'm not going to glue the gun to its carriers, so that I can remove the gun from its base, just to make cleaning underneath the model a bit more easy. Dust will build up on these things over time, so it is quite useful in some cases to be able to separate out the model into two halves that are more easy to handle for cleaning. That brings us to the end of this build series. This model will now go and join the ships in the display cabinet. It will be sitting next to the Yamato to contrast the size of the biggest guns ever fitted to a ship to the biggest gun ever. And it really is quite remarkable how big this gun truly is. It makes the Yamato's guns look small, which is a crazy thing to say considering how large the Yamato's guns actually were. That is why I built this model, to put the size of this gun into context. If you would like to support this channel, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.